Hello, my name is Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our second Policy Power Hour. 2020 and the global pandemic brought unprecedented suffering to families, communities, and businesses all across our nation. Inequality of opportunity and disparities, including racial disparities, were laid bare in the past year amidst record levels of unemployment and record business closures. 2021 is a new year and it brings new hope, as does the vaccine and a promise to the end of this pandemic. We have great hope for the economy and for businesses all across our great nation. But it will always remain true that strong public policy is the foundation that can help an economy grow. On the contrary, misguided policies can hold back economic growth and job creation. As part of our State of American Business, we laid out some of the policies that we think at the U.S. Chamber can put us on a path to greater prosperity for all Americans. Today, in our Power Hour, we're going to focus on Washington and some of the policies that they can help with, including infrastructure, immigration reform, and job training programs. So we hope you enjoy this segment and learning about more of these issues, and we look forward to taking your questions at the end of the program. To help us get started, I'm joined by my colleague, Marty Durbin, who in addition to heading up our Global Energy Institute, serves as Senior Vice President for Policy. Marty?
Thank you, Neil. This morning, the U.S. Chamber and the Bipartisan Policy Center were joined by more than 150 diverse organizations in launching the Build by the 4th of July campaign, urging Congress to enact a fiscally and environmentally responsible infrastructure package that addresses the need for massive investment in transportation, energy, water, and communications technologies. To pick up on Tom Donahue's theme from our State of American Business, making such progress will require building a governing coalition committed to bipartisan solutions. Infrastructure provides one of the best opportunities for such progress, and the campaign calls for legislation that will repair and update our crumbling infrastructure, stimulate our economy and create middle-class sustaining jobs, address climate change, improve federal project approvals, and address the digital divide. So I'm pleased to be joined today by such distinguished and knowledgeable guests for this discussion, each of whose organizations has joined the campaign. Colin O'Mara is President and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation. Yvette Peña-Sullivan is Executive Director in the Office of the General President for the Laborers International Union of North America. And Tom Smith is Executive Director for the American Society of Civil Engineers. Jumping right in, I'll ask each of you the same opening question. While the Build by the 4th of July campaign brings together a diverse coalition who all support swift enactment of durable bipartisan infrastructure package, we also acknowledge up front that these organizations will not agree on every policy issue. I'm certain that our four organizations will have areas of disagreement. So I'd like to ask each of you to take 2 minutes and share with what your organization sees as the opportunities that can be addressed through a comprehensive infrastructure package. Colin, I'll ask you to start and then move to Yvette and then Tom. So Colin?
Great. No, thank you, Marty. And it's great to be with Tom, with you and Yvette. We're really optimistic. I mean, after, 200 infrastructure weeks, we think that the stars have finally aligned to have a big conversation. And again, I apologize. This is kind of a sequester moment. I'm coming to you live from my daughter's room. So I'm trying to be uninterrupted for a little bit. But from the National Wildlife Federation's point of view, we believe we don't have to choose between kind of good infrastructure policy and reducing emissions and making ourselves more resilient, that we can do both. And so, we want to enter this conversation in smart ways as we're talking about advanced transportation solutions, cleaning up our water systems, moving towards cleaner sources of energy, rebuilding American manufacturing. We think is a huge opportunity, having more domestically sourced products, making sure we have good wages on the construction side. And then obviously natural infrastructure is a big priority for us, because a lot of the opportunities that we see, especially through a bipartisan, bicameral conversation, it's going to be around resilience and trying to help communities be safer as we're seeing more extreme weather events. And so we believe we can do these things together. We're thrilled to be part of the coalition. We think success is likely, but those are kind of the main areas that we're thinking about right now.
Great, thank you, Colin. Yvette?
Great. Thank you, Marty. First, I'd like to thank the Chamber for inviting me to be part of this panel to speak about the priorities of the 500,000 men and women that LIUNA represents. I'm very honored to represent them in DC and honored to be here today. Our General President, Terry O'Sullivan, and our legislative team have always appreciated the working relationship that we have with the Chamber. As you know, like Tom from the ASCE, we are proud members of the ATM. And always enjoy our work together on infrastructure. As far as priorities for this Congress, first and foremost, we believe Congress needs to pass additional COVID relief. Families across America are hurting. We need to fight this pandemic and help people. After this, our number one priority, since we are a union that builds America, is getting much investment into physical infrastructure. So money into our highways, bridges, water, waste infrastructure, buildings, schools, you name it. And to continue to do so in a way that will ensure a living wage and power to working people. We want to see a 5-year robust transportation reauthorization bill. And we also are going to continue to support reducing barriers to permitting projects all around. We've been very frustrated by the permitting process being one that makes our members wait months, sometimes years, and ready to do so. They are trained and ready to do the work, and because of needless delays, are unable to. And so we remain committed to the issue of permitting reform. We will also continue to be working on much needed pension reform and assistance. We didn't get it done last year. We worked with the Chamber to get this done, but we'll continue to be working on it this year. And then lastly, immigration reform is also a big priority for the laborers. And we are looking forward to finally getting some kind of comprehensive immigration reform bill done. So there's a lot to do, a lot of priorities, and we look forward to working with all of you really to get them done. So thank you, Marty.
Indeed, there are. Thank you for that. Tom?
Thank you, Marty, and I can a lot of what Colin and Yvette covered. It shows you the importance of this issue and why we're optimistic, because you have all these different groups so aligned, whether that's business, people fighting for the environment and wildlife, people fighting for labor, trying to make sure we're protecting all these critical interests for the nation, and frankly, and also for the planet as we talk about climate change. Infrastructure just aligns with everything. Also, in terms of coming out of this pandemic, economic recession, jobs, global competitiveness, it checks all of the boxes. So it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you all for inviting ASCE, opportunity to serve on this panel to talk about the importance of modernizing our nation's infrastructure. And that includes a broad infrastructure plan that can address jobs, combat climate change, again, protect our global competitiveness as well. We think that is really key to our economic recovery, and also uniting a divided nation by giving people something that's inspiring, something we can work for as a nation. Things like, you look at our history that have worked in the past, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Interstate Highway System, things that mobilized our country and give us pride in the United States of America. So ASCE, we represent about 150,000 members of the civil engineering profession, stewards of our nation's infrastructure. We go back to 1852. We're the folks who do a lot of the design and building and operating and maintaining our infrastructure. One of our initiatives has been reporting on the condition and offering ways to meet the challenge of rehabilitating and repairing and modernizing our built environment. And as Colin will appreciate, making sure that we're doing that in harmony with the natural environment. And as part of this charge, we release an infrastructure report card every 4 years, and that evaluates and reports on the condition and performance of American infrastructure in the form of a school report card that we're all familiar with. And our 2021 infrastructure report card is going to come out on March the 3rd. So we think the timing of that will be good with this discussion as we move towards the 4th of July. This past Tuesday, we also released a new economic study on the impact of infrastructure investment, or the lack thereof. And that's called, it's a failure to act, the economic impacts of the status quo investment across infrastructure systems. So this report answers the critical question of, what does a poor infrastructure grade mean for our economy and for our families? And we found in this report that chronic underinvestment in our infrastructure has pretty serious consequences, as many folks know. Over the next 20 years, the average American household will spend $3,300 a year due to infrastructure deficiencies. And this is, lost disposable income from the disruptions of inadequate infrastructure, like, we all know sitting in traffic or hitting a pothole or power outages or water main breaks, added costs for goods and services. That's the hidden tax that all families are paying now. So of the total economic impacts projected in our 20-year study, more than 3/4 occurred during the second decade, from 2030 to 2039. And about 80% of the gross output losses, 79% of GDP declines, and 78% of disposable income losses are expected to occur between 2030 and 2039. So if we don't act, we really think that by 2039, our forecast, we are forecasted to lose over $10 trillion in GDP, including $2.4 trillion in exports. Our national trade deficit will grow by $626 billion. We'll lose 3 million jobs by 2039. So it's not too late to act. That's why there's a lot of optimism here. We can mitigate the harm to our GDP, our trade volumes, and our declines in personal income. We can increase our investment infrastructure and jumpstart our economy, help us get out of the COVID-19 economic downturn. Transportation and infrastructure have traditionally been a place of bipartisan agreement. So as we enter a new congressional session with a new administration, it's a natural place to find common ground that benefits the American people. We know infrastructure is the backbone of our economy. It's time to pay our overdue infrastructure bill. And by increasing investment, we can upgrade the system, put people to work, protect the GDP, disposable income, and our nation's competitiveness. So if anybody wants more on this report I mentioned, you can just go to asce.org/failure to act. And we're looking forward to further conversation on this. And as I said, also, we think this can be done in a way that really enhances our environment and also protects on this whole issue of climate change that's so important to many of us, on sustainability, on resilience, as we're looking at the increasing disasters and costs. So a lot of opportunity here, and appreciate the Chamber putting this on today and for the invitation.
Thank you, Tom. No, the data and the reports that come out of ASCE are really valuable to the infrastructure debate we're having. Yvette, let me come back to you. As you noted, LiUNA is involved in the construction of nearly every type of infrastructure. But in addition, you and your colleagues in the building trades have built important partnerships with those industries that are actually that are building these projects. So are you optimistic that we can build the broad bipartisan congressional support needed to get this done? And what would you say are the most important factors to make that happen?
Thank you, Marty. Yes, we are definitely optimistic. I believe that we can build the broad congressional support needed to get infrastructure done, but both sides of the aisle and organizations like all of ours really need to recommit to this. The margins of a Democratic majority are slim, and so both sides are going to have to really come to the middle to get anything done. And the middle actually is where LiUNA is most comfortable in, and believe that just all sides need to get there. Infrastructure has always been a bipartisan issue until the last few years, unfortunately, but then again, very little bipartisanship has been existed and everything has become quite political. So I think it's time to go back to that bipartisanship. We believe that Congress should go big on funding and investments and needs to go bipartisan on the actual policies. Investments that are broadly shared by communities and create good jobs with good pay lift everybody, and they provide important opportunities for the underemployed. This will help our economic recovery, as Tom said, while improving our infrastructure and helping our communities prosper. We cannot let partisan policy fights continue to be why we don't make investments needed. HR 2 was a great bill last Congress. We supported it, but it lacked funding and it lacked bipartisan support. And we can't keep doing these political talking points with no actual action. And we have to start having those real conversations about how we're going to fund all of this. LiUNA has always been supportive, just like the Chamber, on increasing or including some kind of a gas tax increase. We need to have those conversations and not run away from it and not just use infrastructure as a political talking point. We don't appreciate politics being played because this is about the livelihoods of our members. This is how they feed their families. And we believe there's a way to come to the middle a little bit more. We can lift all boats. We can address climate change. We can help underrepresented communities and build the 21st century infrastructure that America needs. And it is not acceptable and does not help create a path to bipartisanship when some are very focused on killing some jobs that they deem dirty, even though they are necessary, good, and actually utilizing state-of-the-art and cleaner technologies. You can't just shrug and say, we'll put those working people on those projects in some other project, all in the name of climate change. We've got to have a thoughtful conversation and not just discard some workers and some infrastructures. We can do better than that as a country. Climate change is real, so let's address it. But let's not just shoot from the hip and be unrealistic when addressing it. And this will mean for Congress to stay away from issues that only divide, like the Green New Deal. We need to stop the attack on pipelines and other infrastructure projects that are providing good jobs. And enough with the demonizing of certain infrastructures. And let's build the clean economy and make sure that good jobs are created. We need to build back better, as President-elect Biden says. And if Congress starts to get bogged down on these policies and how this all needs to look like, then from our perspective, then they need to just focus on that transportation reauthorization bill, because we need a long-term bill and not just another one-year extension. And we need to get all of this done by July 4th. America needs it. And we really believe that with the new administration and with the Congress, the time is now for all of us to come together. So it's really about coming to the middle, and we're feeling pretty optimistic. So thank you, Marty.
No, thank you, Yvette. Those are important points. And as our friend at the Bipartisan Policy Center, Jason Gourmet, likes to say that national infrastructure investment is the best idea that never gets done. And I think we're showing that that this is the type of effort we need to have to really focus on how do we actually get it done, get it accomplished, have it enacted. Colin, I wanted to ask you. I know you noted in your remarks that one of the priorities for the National Wildlife Federation is protecting and restoring natural infrastructure. Now, it's a term and concept that may not be broadly understood, so I thought I'd like to ask you to maybe define it for us and explain how you see incorporating natural infrastructure will contribute to more resilient communities.
Yeah, no, thanks, Marty. And like right now, I mean, over the last couple of years, right, we've seen horrific hurricanes in the southeast. We've seen massive flooding, along the Missouri and in the Mississippi. We've seen horrific forest fires in California and across the west. A lot of the impacts of those obviously are derivatives of kind of more intensity and related to climate change, but also because we haven't really made our communities more resilient. And one of the best ways to do so is often restoring these natural systems. And so, in the coastal environments, restoring wetlands and dunes, managing our forests better. I mean, we just haven't invested. We invested a fraction today than what we used to invest in our forests. And the same thing with on working lands. I mean, trying to really drive investment onto the ground as a way to make lands more resilient, but also more profitable for whether it's agriculture or ranching. And so we see big opportunities, again, completely bipartisan. We've seen when we're willing to manage and invest in our natural resources, the returns are high. You create jobs in different industries. You create jobs in outdoor recreation, the economy. You support local economies in big ways. And so we're just encouraging folks to have this be part of the package. And I think, again, and to Yvette's point, by focusing on those things where there is kind of broad agreement, places that do build resilience, places that do reduce emissions, places investments that do create meaningful jobs, and as Tom said, we are going to need to create tens of millions of jobs to get this economy moving again. That's the place that we want to operate. And I'll just note one thing on the energy side. I think one of the things we want to see is a really investment strategy that really helps us deploy the technologies of the future. We all worked together on some really good legislation last year around a range of energy programs, but most of them weren't funded. So now actually getting the money, for the everything from renewables and having those have better wages, but also carbon capture technologies, nuclear energy. I mean, having a full range of technologies that are cleaner, hopefully reducing emissions and putting a lot of people to work. Like that seems to be a sweet spot that could be very bipartisan. And we really hope that this isn't just transportation; that it can be a broader package that includes all the things that you listed at the top, Marty.
Great, thank you, Colin, and I appreciate you raising the energy issue as well. I agree with you. I think it was a real success at the end of the last session to pass the Climate and Energy Innovation Bill, and now it is up to us to make sure that those get appropriately funded. Tom, I want to ask you. You gave us a good summary of the report that just came out, and to be able to detail for us the enormous need for modernizing our infrastructure and both the financial, social, and personal costs that come from not doing so. So what I wanted to ask was, how has the pandemic itself in the last year exacerbated the challenge related to our infrastructure needs, and what would you say are the kind of the highest priority steps that need to be taken?
Good question. There certainly have been some major impacts. I'm listening to Colin talking about the natural infrastructure. I'll say during the pandemic, one of the things we did was we redid our whole parking lot put in a lot of bioretention facilities, precast concrete pavement. We also have some rubberized asphalt, mixed with crushed tires. So we did a number of different things to try and make sure that the water that comes off our site is reduce the quantity and enhance the quality, ultimately turning into the Chesapeake Bay. But during this whole COVID-19 pandemic, it really has exacerbated a pretty difficult revenue situation already. And without federal support, the worsening condition trends are likely to accelerate. We have Americans who stayed at home. State budgets and transportation revenues have seen serious declines in gas tax receipts. We've got an estimated $23 billion loss in airport revenue due to a 95% decline in domestic air travel, projected 30% revenue decline in the next 18 months for the nation's state departments of transportation. That's a sharp drop that's been in available revenue for transportation projects that puts the nation's bridges at further risk of decline. Dramatic nationwide ridership declines in transit systems, which is so important as we talk about the environment. 75% on the PATH commuter rail system in New Jersey and New York, 85% reduction in DC and Metro rail ridership, and 55% decrease in ridership in LA Metro, just to name a few. COVID-19 has had a strong impact on our user fee mechanisms, like the gas tax. So it's also safe to assume that, air and transit travel are going to continue to be hard pressed as public confidence in these systems' ability to keep them healthy continues to suffer. And so we have to make sure and there are a lot of things that are being done to address that and to reassure people's confidence. As a result of low public confidence in transit and air travel, there could then be more cars on our roadways, but it's obviously not certain how stay-at-home orders will change that over time. And that can help, of course, what we're learning on teleworking with some of our transportation systems. Water utilities are seeing decreased revenues due to state-led mandates to continue service throughout the crisis to families no longer able to afford their bill, which is important, of course, and that could later result in water rate hikes, because we have to sustain these systems. America's economy on the whole has taken, a bit of a hit with more than 40 million Americans out of work as a result of COVID. So major impacts as a result of this pandemic. The National League of Cities reported over 700 cities that are going to need to delay or cancel capital investments in infrastructure due to the pandemic. Delays of this magnitude have a long-term impact on our nation's infrastructure. So, thankfully, also during this time, Congress passed the $900 billion stimulus package. We had a $1.4 trillion omnibus bill and begin to providing, relief to American families, state DOTs, and transit agencies. So that package included some key, ASCE priorities. The Water Resources Development Act of 2020, a comprehensive energy package that aims to reduce emissions, as we alluded to. The package also provides $45 billion for the struggling transportation sector, $16 billion to help airlines maintain their payrolls, $14 billion for mass transit, $10 billion for state highways, $2 billion for airports, and $1 billion for Amtrak. So we've been a strong advocate to assist state DOTs, requesting $37 billion in assistance over the next 5 years, and that's an investment that will backstop projected revenue shortfalls and ensure that our infrastructure deficit does not continue to grow. So while the Congress's allocation falls short of the $16 billion request for the current fiscal year, the funding will aid state DOTs to ensure that projects are not further delayed or canceled. So, we really can reverse a decades of underinvestment in our infrastructure and help all communities to thrive. And we have a real opportunity, we think, in the coming months. With Americans enduring an increasing economic burden due to the pandemic, investing in our infrastructure now, we think, is a real key way to lessen that economic burden on Americans in the long term.
Great, thank you, Tom. We know who to go to for the numbers and the details here. Listen, I want to thank.
It's the engineering organization. Sorry, Marty.
No, please don't apologize. No, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Clearly, there's a lot more we could get into in this discussion, and I look forward to following up with each of you to do that. So, an important topic, clearly going to get a lot of attention in the coming weeks and months. So, at this point, I'd like to our co-partners or to our coalition partner, Jason Gramay, founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, for some closing thoughts. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. As I know has been discussed much in the last several days, our country is still reeling from the violence that was visited upon the Capitol and the foundations of our democracy. And many of us are anxious about the days ahead. There is a fundamental question about whether this Congress has the capacity to govern a divided country and address the absolute imperatives of economic recovery and public health brought about by this pandemic. We believe the answer is yes, and believe that a significant effort around infrastructure investment is a critical part of moving the country forwards, which is why we are delighted to be part of a collaborative effort with the US Chamber, with leading labor and environmental organizations, and numerous businesses for the Build by the 4th of July campaign. Our goal is simple. It is to create the broad-based support and animated urgency necessary for Congress to make this an imperative and a priority early this year. There are 4 aspects of this campaign that are critical to the Bipartisan Policy Center. The first is jobs. We have an absolute urgent need to create good paying jobs for the American workers. Infrastructure investment is a proven way to do that. It is also essential that the benefits of modernizing our economy will create much more competition and make it much more possible for us to sustain economic growth going forwards. The second imperative is equity. It is absolutely critical that we make sure that these investments are shared across the country, and particularly in communities that have not had the benefit of this kind of attention in the past. Third is climate change. A well-created positioned infrastructure program can create the technological foundation needed to decarbonize our economy and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And finally, the imperative is fast. Our nation used to build great things and do it quickly. Anybody who truly cares about climate change knows that we have to dramatically accelerate the modernization of our economy, and an infrastructure package can do that. I want to end where I think I began, which is to talk about the importance of a unified agenda. Infrastructure investment can bring the country together. That has been demonstrated by the bipartisan effort in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee to advance a bipartisan highway effort. It is demonstrated by the significant bipartisan support for a major energy technology investment legislation that passed Congress recently. And it is the process by which we believe not only can we modernize the country and address the economy, but also regain some measure of dignity in our democracy. We are eager to be part of this collaboration and appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining us today for this next segment of our discussion on the state of American business. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by 3 key leaders representing different aspects of our economy. Joining me today is Ashley Watts. She's the president and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. Tom Stencil is the president and CEO of the United Fresh Produce Association, and Ali Noorani is the president and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. These 3 experts are joining us today to talk a little bit about the state of the American workforce, the employment situation, immigration, and job training. So there's lots to talk about, so let's just jump right in. You know, if we rewind a year ago, and I realize a lot happened last week, and a lot's really happened in all of 2020. But if we rewind a year ago, the most dominant conversation that we were having with businesses of all sizes in all industries, really all across the country, was the lack of available skilled workers to meet their workforce demands. You know, we were experiencing generational low unemployment levels. And yet today the situation looks a little bit different. We have 10 million jobs that were displaced in the great pandemic. But at the same time, we have some sectors of the economy who are beginning to look like they did a year ago, in desperate need of those skilled workers. So let's just start by figuring out the state of the labor force today. Ashley, what are you seeing in Kentucky?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. In Kentucky, we have been hit pretty hard by the pandemic when it comes to workforce. I think we are in the top 5 that have been affected with the most job losses, and really those vulnerable categories, those jobs that really have been displaced during the pandemic. The latest numbers we have is that almost 250,000 Kentuckians have left the workforce since March of 2019. This is obviously a startling statistic for a state our size. But workforce is still very much an issue. Like you mentioned, Neil, some parts of the economy are booming, some industries are booming. And so really we've tried to figure out that shift and where the workforce needs to be. We at the Chamber have about 90,000 open jobs posted on our website across Kentucky. And we know that is probably not even a fraction of the open jobs in Kentucky, but we do know there are specific industries that are still really looking for that skilled and qualified worker. So we're just trying to figure out how to match up the 250 workers that have left the workforce over the last year and match them with these open jobs. And so really it's been a challenge, obviously, as any state has had to see in the last year, but making sure that we are, retaining that workforce, upskilling them, giving them the training they need to maybe meet a new part of the economy, a new industry or a booming industry is what we're really looking at now. But with 250,000 people leaving the workforce in 1 year, we have a lot of ground to make up. And so hopefully now that the vaccine is out, hope is on the horizon, we will start getting those people back into the workforce.
We really want to get into it in a second, how we make those transitions. But let's spend a few more minutes talking about those who have been displaced. And, Ashley talked a little bit about how they're concentrated in a few industries. The statistics truly bear this out. If you look at the leisure and hospitality, the restaurant and accommodation industry, recreation and arts and entertainment, that really is the bulk of the job losses we have. And, those sectors also happen to be for many immigrant business owners, their line of work, Ali. You work every day on both immigration reform, but also helping immigrant entrepreneurs. What are you seeing in the immigrant small business owner?
Well, oftentimes when we're talking about the immigrant-owned business or the immigrant-founded business, we're always talking about Fortune 500, where 40% of Fortune 500 companies have been founded by an immigrant or a child of immigrants, which is wonderful. But when you look at Main Street USA, then you see that in 2017, 3.2 million immigrants owned their own businesses. They employed approximately 8 million Americans, and those businesses in 2017 generated $1.3 trillion in sales. So that is very much the bedrock of local economies that I think we'd all agree are really going through a tough stretch right now. So what we're seeing is that, number one, these business owners, they are less likely to access the public resources that are available, say the PPP program and otherwise. In fact, 71% of Latinos had not applied for the program back in June of 2020 when it was first put on place. So there's a real need to make sure that these programs are accessible by Latino and immigrant-owned businesses, because these are the businesses that, like I said, they're the bedrock of local economies, and they're employing millions and millions of Americans themselves. So there's a real opportunity there, and we could very well see a good chunk of our economic growth coming from immigrant-owned businesses in cities and towns across the country.
That has been one of the great success stories, right? Is these immigrant-owned businesses who create all these jobs. And obviously, it's not just that we want to add jobs; we want to create new businesses that keep that dynamism going. When I think back over the past year and about industries that have had to adapt and things that maybe we used to take for granted, and hopefully today have a little bit more respect for. Tom, I can't help but think about the companies that you represent, right? So we had a fundamental change up. We had employers, your producers, your fresh produce producers had to adjust to a pandemic world, but also a fundamental change from consuming in restaurants to consuming at home and how groceries are delivered. I think it's a fascinating story, so I'm just hoping you'll tell us a little bit about what you saw in the past year.
Neil, you put your finger on it when you said, think back to a year ago, where were we? And we were facing the same immigration challenge, the lack of farm workers. It was the number one issue that we had as an industry. But with the COVID hit and the pandemic, it's been sort of try to keep the business going. So working with our farm workers, trying to keep them safe, reimagining the workplace, reimagining housing for our farm workers. This has just been a nonstop operation trying to keep going. As you mentioned, when the restaurant industry shut down, it was an overnight experience. So basically 50% of all the food we consume in America was outside of the home. And all of a sudden that had to go through a different supply chain, had to go through the retail side. And a number of the farmers and distributors had to refocus their business completely. It's interesting listening to Ali about immigrant entrepreneurs. We have a number of immigrant who are leaders and supervisors and foremen in our industry. Not as many owners, although that's increasing. But it's been very important that we have a newfound respect in the country for these essential farm workers that are feeding the rest of us.
So we want to get into today how we begin addressing all of these challenges, but maybe we'll start with the employment mismatched challenge that Ashley kind of led off with. So you gave us the numbers for Kentucky. Let me give us the numbers for the nation. I mentioned there are 10 million jobs that existed pre-pandemic that don't exist today. 10 million people who've left the employer payroll. But interestingly, we also had 6.7 million job openings. So similar to your 90,000 that you're trying to fill there in Kentucky. One of the things that we've taken note of at the U.S. Chamber is that these look like two very different groups. We talked about the hospitality industry and food accommodations, but if you look at the open jobs, they're in healthcare, they're in professional and business services. And so it's maybe a little bit more difficult for an individual to move from one industry where the jobs have been lost to that new industry where the jobs exist. In Kentucky, you run something called the Talent Pipeline Management Program that's designed to address that challenge. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, and we're very appreciative of the U.S. Chamber Foundation for kind of leading the way on talent pipeline management. Back in 2018, Kentucky was one of the first states to really launch what we call TPM. And basically, it's an employer-led system that makes sure that we are building that talent that we need for the jobs that we're going to have tomorrow. So in the last couple of years, we have pulled together 27 industry collaboratives all across Kentucky, made up of all different industries, to really work together and to forecast what kind of jobs they're going to have in the future, and then working with the education community to make sure that they're going to be able to get those jobs. It's been pretty interesting over the last year how kind of those collaboratives, even though none of us could have foreseen a pandemic, and originally they were all pulled together to really use each other's data and work together as a specific industry, whether that's construction or administrative services or logistics, to make sure they had that workforce. But really, throughout the pandemic, they also had each other to rely on, to ask questions about, to talk about how one business was doing, another business across different parts of the state. So it was really nice. They almost had the kind of their little mini associations where we could make connections and have solutions within those groups. So TPM, even amidst a pandemic, is still going really well. We now have, I think, about 7 full-time staff at the Kentucky Chamber that are working full-time on this project. And what's really neat about it, and I probably should have started off with this, is that it's really kind of a public-private partnership. The Kentucky Chamber runs it. It was kind of spearheaded by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, but we have a contract and an agreement and a partnership with Kentucky state government. And so that started back in 2018 under a Republican governor who was really excited about this work and really kind of believed in what the chamber was going to do in terms of leading workforce initiatives. And last year, our state flipped to having a Democratic governor. Our contract was up. We weren't sure exactly if it was going to get renewed, if he wanted to kind of be part of this vision that we had. And after learning about it, they signed on immediately. And so it's just kind of a really nice program that we have where we work with both sides of the aisle, work with state government to really make sure that our talent and our workforce needs of tomorrow are met. And it's something that the business community can really kind of take a hold of. It's employer-led, and the state has been very, very gracious and grateful for our work on this and really making sure that employers are at the table when a lot of these discussions are being made.
Yeah, the fascinating thing about to me is that it makes so much sense. There's a logic to it, but the real, unlike maybe training programs that have traditionally existed in the public sector, what this is really designed to is help people get skills for jobs that actually exist in their community, and to get the skills that the employers in their community, i.e. the people who are going to be hiring them, say they need. And so when we've seen failure in a lot of training programs in the past, it's because we're training people for jobs that don't exist in a certain area. It's always good to get new skills, but it's a lot better to have those skills translate into a job that's actually open. Over the break, I was reading Christmas break, reading some economic studies. Sometimes that's what I do over the Christmas break. And there's a really great new one out that reports that programs like this, like the one you were just describing, Ashley, it's not just good for boosting employment, it actually boosts individual wages by between 11 and 40%. So it's not just that people got new skills, they got better paying jobs. And that's the dream, right? Is to get new skills and better jobs and a better livelihood for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
Ollie, you operate a training program as well. Tell us a little bit about it and how it works, and how you've addressed some of these challenges.
Sure. So when you look at the economy across the spectrum, 1 in 10 workers are limited English proficient, and 43% of those workers are in industries like retail, manufacturing, logistics, food service. And right now, those workers are working shoulder to shoulder with the native-born American to help us respond and recover to COVID-19. But what can we do to ensure that those workers who are limited English proficient increase their English language skills? So a few years ago, with the support of the Walmart Foundation, we partnered with the Miami-Dade College and Community College Consortium for Immigrant Education to launch English at Work. And this is a program that is 60% online, 40% offline, in person, or either in person physically or virtually, to help people increase their English language skills. And it's been really remarkable because over a 16-week program in industries ranging from Lyft to Whole Foods, and we're now talking to, in fact, a number of growers in California, Tom, is we've seen a increase in English language skills just over 16 weeks. In the second year of the program, 37% of people who completed the program received a promotion because of increased English language skills. And then also, their managers, their leadership within those stores or facilities, they were saying that folks were more productive, better partners and collaborators internally, there's better understanding of kind of health and safety procedures. So it's just kind of a win-win. And from our perspective, it's a great way for corporate America to say, you know what, we're going to invest in our immigrant workforce and ensure that people have the skills so that they can reach their fullest potential.
That's fantastic. We love these kind of stories and these kind of it really shows what business-led solutions can do. Let's turn for a second to one of the other topics that we started hearing about when we started this segment, and that's immigration reform. Tom, you mentioned how critical it was a year ago for the fresh produce industry, and still critical today.
No question, Neil. It's been more than 30 years since we've had any real immigration reform in the country, back when Ronald Reagan was president. And as you know, it's been a tireless battle trying to find a way to create that legal workforce. We, particularly in the farm worker community, we are dependent on that immigrant workforce. But these are not people crossing the border today to come work in agriculture. 75% of our undocumented workers have been in the country more than 15 years. So these are families, they're raising their children, they're participating in programs like Ali was just talking about. They want their children to grow as part of the American dream. They are the dreamers. And I think it's a new time, perhaps, as we look forward. There may be an opening. There may be an opening with the administration, with the new Congress coming in, where we can go again at this very critical issue for the future of the country. We are dependent on this immigrant workforce, not just in my sector, but in many other sectors of the economy. So I certainly think it's time for us to rally around a common position and make a difference for these folks.
Tom, you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago in a different forum, and you said something really smart that got me really optimistic about the possibility of immigration reform. Because sometimes you feel like, gosh, we've been at this so long. When are we going to finally get this done? You mentioned something about that bipartisan agriculture bill and the possibility that Congress is going to have to address the Dreamers and what kind of coalition that might create. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Neil, I think you're right on that. President-elect Biden has been very clear that he wants to pass a bill to protect the Dreamers, to give them legal status. But I think if we can marry that with the agricultural reform bill as well, that's going to bring a more bipartisan nature to it. A number of Republicans, Dan Newhouse out of Washington State has led kind of the Republican side on immigration reform. Zoe Lofgren in the House on the Democratic side. We had passed a farm workforce bill in the last Congress with a bipartisan vote. We didn't get there in the Senate, but I do think if we marry those two concepts, we may have the best opportunity yet.
Ollie, you're front and center on this as well. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a huge opportunity for Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate to work together. I love the idea of wedding Dreamers and farm workers. I think there's a lot of potential. I think the Biden administration can move forward with a number of executive orders addressing legal immigration, particularly for the legal immigrant workforce, refugee resettlement, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? Given what we as a nation have gone through over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about why immigrants come to the U.S. And they come to the U.S., I believe, for our democracy. Because our democracy provides the freedom and opportunity for somebody to pursue their dreams. And I think that this is the opportunity for Republicans in Congress, the Biden administration, is to see immigration as an opportunity to bring the country back together, create bipartisan change that meets the needs of the American worker and their families.
Ashley, I'm going to give you the last word. If we were able to get all this done, how would that be received by the businesses you represent in Kentucky?
Yeah, I think Ali summed it up wonderfully. I mean, I don't think I can say it any better than that, but immigration reform is a top priority for us at a federal level. We are an agriculture state. Immigrants are entrepreneurs in Kentucky, and they have a huge impact on our economy. They create good paying jobs. And so we really do look forward to this next administration and kind of Congress, that this is something that can get done on a bipartisan level that really will help not only immigrants achieve the dream that they came here to do, but also help our economy and create jobs as well.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. That's a great place to leave it on. Tom, Ali, Ashley, thank you not just for joining us today, but for the leadership that you all give to these issues, to workforce training programs, food building, and to immigration reform. None of it would be possible but for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, those were two great panels. I hope you found them as informative as Marty and I did. And now we want to spend a few minutes getting to your questions. So Marty's rejoined me here on our virtual stage, and we're going to turn to our first question from our friend Gene Barr, who heads up the Pennsylvania Chamber. I think we actually have his question here loaded and ready to go. Marty, maybe you can take this one. Gene's asked that historically infrastructure has really meant roads, bridges, and highways, but he's talking about the need for broadband access and connectivity. How is that going to factor into an infrastructure bill in 2021?
Well, thanks, Neil, and thanks, Gene, for the question. And no question that we've got the digital divide to deal with. But the good news is that the omnibus bill that passed at the end of the year, which was also the stimulus, it included funding to conduct mapping that will clearly identify where gaps on broadband exist, funding to build out broadband in rural and tribal areas, and grants to address affordability in underserved communities. So the quickest thing that can be done is to make sure that we deploy those resources and then work with stakeholders to develop the necessary communication-specific permitting reforms. Because as we've seen with all of our infrastructure, we need to make sure that we can build all of this necessary infrastructure as quickly as we can.
Great, thank you, Marty. Another infrastructure question. We have a questioner asking what the prospects are for a national infrastructure bank as part of this effort.
Well, again, thanks for the question. Yeah, the infrastructure bank's been an issue that's been under discussion for a number of years, and we think it definitely needs to be part of the funding and financing solution. We wouldn't be sure that, are we creating a new one, or should we be focusing on better utilizing the current funding bank, the infrastructure bank, TIFIA at the U.S. Department of Transportation, make it simpler, make it more accessible, to those who need to get to those funds.
That's great. One of the things we know to meet all of our infrastructure needs, there's not just going to be a single source of revenue, right? We're going to have to put together lots of different financing pieces. It's going to have to be direct revenue. It's going to have to be user fees. It's going to have to be those public-private partnerships. It's going to have to be leverage, right? We're not going to solve this problem with just one tool. We're going to have to use every tool in the toolbox and probably invent some additional tools that we haven't even thought of yet to help meet those needs. Let's turn to a different question we have here, jumping to the workforce issues that we just talked about. Our questioner asks, what could happen to the U.S. workforce if we do not amp up our efforts to reskill them for a newly automated economy? I'll tackle this one, and I'll ask Marty if he wants to jump in afterwards. But this is one of my personally great concerns, and I think one of the huge lessons that we have to take from the Great Recession. If we rewind to the Great Recession and we look at what happened to workers, particularly prime age working males, men between the age of 25 and 54, who were displaced during the early months of the Great Recession and who never returned to the workforce, and what that contributed to the opioid epidemic and a lot of the social ills that we've seen since then. We know that the longer that someone is out of work and doesn't have a job, the harder it is for them to get a job, the harder it is for them to re-enter the workforce. And every time that occurs, that's a tragedy, both for that individual and their family, but it also means the overall economy suffers. It's one of the reasons it took so long to recover from the Great Recession. So it's not just an opportunity lost if we don't help people get the skills for the jobs that are being created. It's going to be a real drag on the economy, and it's going to mean a lot of suffering for a lot of individuals. So that's why reskilling is such a top priority for us at the Chamber. Marty, any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, in recovering from the previous recession, as you recall, one of the great bright spots in the economy was energy, and we saw huge job growth in the energy industry, which brought really good paying jobs as well. And so I do believe that, as we look to the coming year and the years ahead of us, there's a continued opportunity in all parts of the energy industry. With clean energy, with traditional energy, I thought Yvette did a nice job of talking about the importance of jobs in the energy industry. So I think it fits right into what we're saying here.
Yeah, Marty, our next question is going to take us back to the environment and infrastructure. And they ask, given the importance of R&D to a zero carbon economy, does scientific infrastructure have a place in an infrastructure bill? Maybe you can comment on that, but also remind people what was just signed into law.
Exactly, and this is one of the reasons for great optimism. So in the last Congress, we saw an enormous bipartisan effort supported by one of the more diverse groups I've ever been a part of, including our Colin O'Mara, as he mentioned on our earlier panel, to enact legislation that provided for research and development in climate and energy innovation technology. Everything from battery storage to carbon capture to advanced nuclear to wind and solar. There's a really important role for the federal government to play here. And so now what we need to do is two things: make sure that those programs are funded as we move forward. And then secondly, it's going to be up to the private sector to take the steps necessary to deploy, commercialize, and actually put those technologies into operation which will then bring us everything we've been focusing on. We need to meet the energy demands of the future with as few emissions as possible.
Excellent. We're going to go back to workforce now. I love how these questions are keeping us bouncing back and forth. The questioner asked, the unemployment rate for African Americans is 2.5 times the rate, in some places 3 times the unemployment rate for whites. How can we target this issue and narrow the gap? Let me take it from the workforce side, and then Marty, maybe you can address the infrastructure side of that. From the workforce side, that's one of the reasons I think the programs like Ashley was talking about, the talent pipeline management that really focus on getting people skills in their local communities for the jobs that exist in those communities is so critically important. And one of the things our colleagues at the U.S. Chamber of Foundation have been working on is how we take that talent pipeline program and really target it to African American, other minority neighborhoods where the needs are so great. If we can both create the workforce there, I'm confident that lots of employers are going to be looking to go there to fill open jobs and to meet their needs. And so it is one of the great challenges. Marty?
Well, just to reiterate Tom's comments from earlier in the week, rebuilding the nation's infrastructure is one of the fastest and most direct ways to create new jobs and spur economic growth. And that's because another reason why we're focusing on the broad infrastructure package. Tom Smith mentioned as well. Yeah, absolutely, surface transportation. We've got to have a major focus there. But to be able to get to water infrastructure and the energy infrastructure and communications as well, just an enormous opportunity for creating really good paying jobs.
Thank you, Marty. All right, we have time for one more question, and we're going to stay on these workforce labor issues. How has the increased use of technology during the pandemic helped or hurt the labor market in key industries? I'll give us a quick answer before we close here. Technology, the great myth that technology is a destroyer of jobs. It's never been the case. It's never been true with respect to computers. It's never been true with respect to manufacturing and machines and the industrial revolution. But what is true is that it reshuffles jobs, that it displaces old jobs and it creates new jobs. And technology means, because of the pace of technology today, it's happening faster than ever before, which is why those reskilling programs that we just talked about are really so important. The future of education and skills isn't going to look like it did in the past. It's not going to be going to high school and maybe community college and college and then ending your learning. The future is going to be about lifelong learning and constantly updating your skills and adjusting to new technology and to new job opportunities. And it's a pretty exciting future, but it's one in which we got to update and modernize our educational systems, our job training systems to meet the way the world works today, not the way it looked 40 years ago when a lot of these programs were created. It's a great question. I apologize that we haven't been able to get to all the other questions today, but please do reach out to us at the U.S. Chamber, reach out to Marty, reach out to myself, our colleagues. We are here to work for you. We hope you've enjoyed the second of our 3 power hours, and we'll hope you'll turn in tomorrow. Tomorrow, noon Eastern, we'll have our third and final power hour of the State of American Business Week, where we're going to focus on state policies with national implications. We're going to be joined by a whole host of state leaders and business leaders and entrepreneurs who are going to tell us what we need to know about state policy as we look ahead into 2021. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon.